welcome to this webinar. I'm so glad you are here joining us today. We are going to be talking about accounts payable challenges. We were talking a little bit before we got started, and I was talking to Carmen, and we were sort of laughing because I was a finance major in college, and it wasn't really a terrific choice for me because I find that I just don't like the numbers that much, and so I have such admiration for Carmen and Kim, who dig into that stuff, and the world would not function without you guys being able to do that today. So I want to do a couple of housekeeping things, but before we get started, if you actually go in and hit the little chat button down at the bottom, if you can't see it, if you move your mouse down there, you'll be able to see it. Love to have you just drop into chat. So the first thing before you drop anything into chat, you'll see a button that says to, and it probably defaults to panelists. And so if you'd move that to all the panelists and attendees so everybody can see your chats, that would be great. But we'd love to hear who's here, where you're from, what part of the company, what company, what part of the country, and what company you are with or organization. We'd love to have you drop that into chat while we are doing some housekeeping. So we are recording the webinar. We've had several requests from people already saying, hey, I registered, but not going to be able to make it. So we will take the recording, and it'll take a few hours, but we should have an email out to you either at the end of the day today or sometime tomorrow with a link to the recording. And so you will be able to access that. If you have comments or questions, feel free to use chat and drop it in there. We've actually hidden the Q&A. It's easier there. We'll try to handle questions along the way. So we've got Edmond, Alberta, Canada, Roswell, Georgia, lots of people all over the country, the international webinar. So with that, we're going to get started here. I'm going to let Carmen and Kim really do their own introductions. Kim, we'll start with you. Kim is with Yardi, and Carmen is with Silverado. And we all, Silverado, of course, and Yardi, we all know both companies great. And so with that, Kim, I'm going to let you bring your slides up and turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Steve. And as you mentioned, hello everyone, my name is Kim Hensley, and I am a manager with Yardi's Procure to Pay team. I've been with Yardi for 15 years, and I've been with the Procure to Pay team for the last 9 years and just love what I do. And I've held many different roles, which it's been exciting for me. And I'm coming to y'all today from beautiful Western North Carolina, even though it's rainy. And so thanks for everyone's time today. And now I'd like to pass it over to my co-presenter, Carmen Tomasi.
Yep, thank you, Kim. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're at. My name is Carmen Tomasi. I'm the corporate controller here at Silverado Senior Living. We focus primarily in, not primarily, exclusively in memory care, and we have a complementary hospice line of business. I've been in accounting and finance in one way or another for going on 20 years. Biggest chunk of that span for me was a little over 10 years in public accounting. Spent about 6 or 7 years at Ernst & Young, and another 3 or 4 in a smaller regional firm. And through that time, I focused primarily on health sciences. Most of that time was spent in provider care, so senior living, hospice, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. But really excited about Silverado right now, and Yardi as well.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Carmen, for being here with me today. So,
just a little bit of, oh, sorry, if you want to go back just one slide there, Kim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a little bit more about Silverado, if we could brag a little bit. This is one of our newer facilities out of the Midwest in St. Charles, Illinois. I'm very proud of the building, but we've got locations all over the country. California, a lot in the Midwest, got a pretty significant presence in Texas, and we are looking to expand into the future.
Wow, that looks beautiful. That looks like a beautiful facility. So Carmen and I are here today to talk about some AP headaches that you may be experiencing with your AP process, and also to offer some recommendations. And as Steve mentioned, please submit any questions in chat, and we'll hopefully answer those for you. So what's the business challenge here that we're trying to resolve? So what I have seen and Carmen has seen is that a manual procure to pay process creates issues for multiple teams within your organization. So, for invoice processing, as many of you know, the struggle is mostly around manual scanning and time to complete data entry. There's also a lack of visibility into budgets and how pending invoices are affecting those over budget variances. But in addition to that, because there's minimal oversight with an unautomated process, this can often lead to duplicate payments to your vendors and data entry errors that can lead to costly overruns. So we see real benefits to automating the procure to pay process. So a couple of years ago, there was a study done by Aberdeen Research Group, as well as we did an analysis of data across about 800 of our current Yardi procure to pay clients. And what we saw was that Yardi clients see significant savings in terms of speed, cost, and accuracy with that automated process. So, for example, while it can take upwards of 20 days to take an invoice through a workflow and to get it ready for payment with the manual process, the median Yardi procure to pay client can accomplish this in as little as under 5 days. So when using a disjointed process, the cost of a fully loaded invoice can be up to $35, whereas our clients that are using Yardi's procure to pay and pay scan can spend as little as $4 per invoice. And it's not just the speed that improves with the automated process, the accuracy can also increase dramatically. So we see that with our pay scan clients, they need to make corrections less than 2% of the time. So they're spending less time on reversing payables and voiding checks. So what this means is that your team can truly focus on higher value add activities rather than worrying about errors that may be occurring and having to correct them during the process. So Carmen, it's my understanding that when you first joined Silverado, they were using 5 different AP systems, and you quickly recognized how inefficient this was. Tell us, what your daily AP process was like at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. When leading up to the 20 years before I arrived at Silverado, the company experienced a tremendous amount of growth, really coming from a mom and pop type shop and really turning into a large organization. And what we found, or what I found, is that we grew almost too quickly and our processes weren't able to catch up, and our accounts payable processing was a good example of that. And so we sort of had an amalgamation of 4, 5, 6 different ways to pay bills. And so what we found is that we spent more time trying to get these systems to talk to each other than actually doing our day job. So it was a really an untenable situation, meaning we were severely limited on functionality in those systems because they didn't talk to each other. So a simple thing like getting a purchase order approved was extremely difficult, if not impossible, and making those systems talk. Another good example of that, because the systems were disparate, is that we literally had our approvals written on an Excel, our approval limits on an Excel sheet that was posted on a corkboard that we relied on the accuracy of our AP clerks to make sure that the invoice approval limits were being met and to kind of kick them back. It was sort of a crazy system, and really was inefficient and ineffective for us. Wow,
yeah. Just managing my logins and passwords for 5 different systems every day would drive me crazy. Plus, without the centralized location of data, there's no way to know, what each community is doing. And, as we well know, even though the spend limits may be listed clearly on the Excel spreadsheet on the corkboard, people may sometimes fudge those limits and send through approvals that may be really, for invoices, maybe that invoice did not really need to be approved. So after seeing this, what steps did you take to simplify and kind of streamline the process at Silverado?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our first order of business was to try to streamline or trim down the number of systems that we were using to pay bills. And so for us, that solution was Yardi PayScan. It's really Yardi's solution for processing large amounts of payables. The other complementary service we took on was Yardi Full Service, so they actually do the data entry piece for us. And so really the idea was to get it all into one system so that you could appropriately leverage the system to be what it's supposed to be. And so we're night and day different from where we were just 4 years ago. And now that we've got one system that's paying all our bills and it's automated, we're not relying on that court board approval form. We've leveraged Yardi's workflows, so all the approvals are electronic. We've also got new vendors set up in workflow so that those new vendor approvals go up through purchasing and risk and legal for their review and approval to make sure that we're not taking on new vendors. And it also allowed us, all of these processes really streamlined a lot of work for us. It allowed us to centralize a big chunk of the business office function. So we basically took 20 FTEs and turned it into 3 people and got better results. So we're really excited about that. The other things you're able to do, then you pick up more steam when you're able to centralize in that way. And so you've got 3 people to deal with that are experts in what you want them to be expert in. And you could do things like set up a new workflow for referral fees. I'm sure you guys are dealing with those types of things. And so what we found a lot of times is that we would have referral sources, sending us a bill and hoping it sticks to the wall. And sometimes it would, even if it wasn't appropriate, charging us the wrong amount, or maybe they weren't the first referral source, and et cetera, et cetera. So we built in the workflow that comes up through the central home office, where I've got an expert in that field that can check and hold them accountable. And just that one little project, just a small example for us, we saved literally $100,000 in the first 6 months of implementing that, in avoiding paying those referral fees inappropriately or getting our money back when we needed to get our money back. So it's been a real win for us.
Well, that's great to hear. And, because of those automated and online workflows, the invoices are now being routed to the people that are those specialists to ensure that, is that referral fee valid or not, based upon that type of expense. So, less time to review that invoice, less errors created because of that automated process. And that's great to hear. So, you mentioned that, you added this vendor workflow, and you touched a little bit upon, the use of purchase orders and purchase order workflows. You mentioned that briefly. So that's our next subject, because the other challenge that we see, the other difficulty, is that as it relates to procurement of goods and services, we often see a high degree of non-compliant spend and a disparate set of suppliers across the properties because, people aren't controlling, Carmen, the vendors, that they're doing business with. And this, combined with a lack of reporting, can create missed opportunities to leverage that spend for potentially more favorable terms. And there's no consistency to the products that are being purchased across the communities. So can you talk a little bit about, how the control and compliancy has improved based upon just, implementing the vendor workflows and using purchase order workflows?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it all starts with our new vendor workflow in Yardi. So somebody will make a request, it'll get added in Yardi, and it'll move on to the next step, which we've predefined as a purchasing review. So we have our purchasing team take a look at the new vendor and say, hey, if sounds like you guys want to use Jim Bob's termite company, but we do work with Billy Joe's termite company because we get a better deal, and we can sort of put the kibosh on that right there, or at least have the conversation about what's the appropriate thing for that particular situation. And once everybody's comfortable there, it elevates up, and the decision is made. It's like, hey, if we're going to sign a contract for, related to this new vendor, it will go to the next step in the workflow, which goes to our risk and legal department. And so we really try our hardest to make sure that any contracts that are signed out of the home office for lots of reasons, primarily legal risk, and we just want to make sure we're not signing the company up for something that's not beneficial for us. And so we've got a team on our risk and legal side that takes a look at those contracts and say, hey, we really need to have these tweaks made in the contract, or this isn't really something that we sign up for, or hey, we're good with this. And you kind of have that back and forth in Yardi, and then we move it along to the next step. And then and only then will we be able to get them set up in Yardi and even start a purchase order, even start the conversation about buying something from them. So that's been a real win for us, sort of a gatekeeper process for us. And then it goes on to the next step, the kind of normal steps you would expect that you sort of take for granted when you have a system set up the right way, but when you don't, it can be pretty painful, is purchase orders. And so once the new vendor set up, we create those purchase orders. That purchase order workflow pretty much mirrors our invoice approval workflow. And so everybody that's important enough to see on that chain, depending on size and what it is, gets a chance to review that. A good example of how we've benefited from that streamlined workflow is that we've had director of plant ops in one of our communities said, hey, and the administrators, hey, we really need to put carpet in this community. And they went ahead and went through all the rigmarole and got the vendor approved and went up and submitted a purchase order for the approval, and went up all the way because it was a significant dollar amount, went all the way up to our CFO and CEO, and they said, hey, we're doing a remodel on that facility in 6 months, so we are not putting new carpet in right now just to rip it out in 6 months. And so that saved us $60,000 just like that. Something, a miscommunication like that along the chain is really easy to avoid when you have Yardi, essentially documenting those approvals and saying, hey, in stone, this is what's going to happen, and make sure that everybody agrees on it. So it's been a win-win for us there.
So great, that's wonderful. So just to summarize, it sounds like with the vendor workflows, you're helping eliminate risk because you're making sure your vendors are vetted out. You're making sure that the contracts are vetted out by your legal team before they're even entered into the system and approved for your team to do business with. And then once that vendor's approved and valid for conducting business, purchase orders are being created so that there's full transparency and communication into the request, into the service that is needed. Everyone can see it, and everyone has the ability to say, yes, this is needed, or no, we do not need this service today. And it's all in that centralized location and automated. And so everyone has that information. So it's also helping with that communication. That sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more small point in the example that I provided with the carpet that was going to be purchased, is the functionality in Yardi. When we create the purchase order, we can also attach documents. And so when it rolled all the way up the chain, we have pictures of the carpet and floor plan where it was going to go. And so it was really easy to get a meeting of the minds, and we benefit from that type of thing, that fluidity of information every day.
Yeah, that is great. And what's also nice is that information is available historically. And I think Steve has raised his hand. He may have a question.
I have one question that came in that I thought was really good, and that's Carmen, how many users do you have in your accounts payable team, and how many users in your pay scan? And I would actually, that's the question, but I think in order to have that be meaningful, you need to maybe talk a little bit about how many communities and how many residents you serve, so we've got some understanding of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So we serve about 40 operating sites across our various business lines. And maybe to answer the question, maybe I'll give you a little bit of context, is that before we adopted PayScan, and before we had some of this transition we talked about with the business office, we had 4 people in accounts payable, and then we had an office manager at each one of the sites that was approving invoices in one way or another. post-transition, when we consolidated into the business office into the home office, we're able to trim that down to one accounts payable person and a person that does sort of a quarter duties, just managing those processes and making sure the workflows are updated, et cetera, along with other responsibilities. But the big win for us was the consolidation of the business office. And I think what we learned is we were asking the business office to be masters of all trades, and what we ended up getting was jacks of all trades. And of course, there's exceptions to that rule. And there were a couple of unicorns, we called them, that were really good at a lot of things. It was really difficult for us to find people that were really experts in everything that we needed them to be. And so you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish with 3 or 4 people that are really experts in what you're asking them to do versus 20 people that maybe are, focused in different areas. So hopefully that answers. I think the total number of users in PayScan outside of accounts payable, gosh, we're probably approaching 300 people. And really the number ballooned for us when we took on PayScan and we started doing the purchase order approvals, because we basically have all the leadership in each of the communities is in a workflow in one way or another to ask the vendor to approve a purchase order, even the director of culinary or the director of plant ops. They're reviewing those invoices all the way up to the administrator and our director of resident engagement, all the way up through the C-suite. And so that's another thing. We really got a whole big chunk of people in Yardi, which was another win in itself. We could talk about later, but hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carmen, and thanks for that great question. So, we've talked about invoice processing, we've talked about procurement, those difficulties, and just to continue the discussion around, vendor management that Carmen and I were speaking about. So, as you know, vendors are the lifeblood of the accounts payable process, and making them more efficient is one of the easiest ways to make your AP process more efficient. So to understand, the vendor bases within the real estate organizations, Yardi analyzed 25 million invoices processed by our Yardi Procure to Pay clients. So these invoices were submitted by approximately 1 million vendors to more than 1,000 of our clients in multiple countries. And through this analysis, we found a consistent segmentation of vendors. So there are those who send up to 4 invoices per month to the client, and we refer to these as low volume vendors. And then there are those who send 5 or more invoices per month, and we refer to these as high volume vendors. Now, the low volume vendors account for 93% of a typical vendor base, but they're generating only 25% of the invoices. And this could be because they're providing a specialty service, or because that vendor, may have been used simply because it was convenient at that time. High volume vendors make up 7% of a typical vendor base, but they generate 75% of those invoices. So your AP team is spending the majority of their time scanning, keying, and verifying the invoices for these high volume vendors. So only 7% of your vendor base. So we have some recommendations for that. So for the low volume vendors, if you can provide an online vendor portal where they can update their profile, check the status of their invoices and payments, and even submit invoices to you digitally, this will save you time. So just by allowing the vendor visibility and invoice and payment status, even if they're not submitting invoices, it's going to save time on both sides, because they're not emailing your team, they're not calling you, asking you about the status of an invoice or the status of a payment. There's no time spent, on the AP team side reviewing that invoice and then replying to the vendor. So even if they're not submitting invoices, just by allowing them transparency into their day-to-day business with you is a benefit to both sides. Now, for your high volume vendors, there's typically already an existing relationship, and there's a dedicated contact at your company typically, which that does help communication with the vendors. But think of the time that can be saved if we can automate the creation of the invoices and the data entry of the invoices from these vendors, which again, 7% of your vendors making up 75% of your invoices. So these vendors can use the online platform to submit invoices, but for larger vendors, this may not be feasible. If they have the technology, they can use, EDI, which is electronic data interchange, to automate the submission. But if neither of these options are viable, we recommend outsourcing invoice scanning and data entry. So just to give you kind of an idea of the time that you can save with, automating the creation of invoices, whether through submission of an online vendor portal, through EDI functionality, or through outsourcing the creation and data entry. We looked at our clients in the last year. Our Procure to Pay clients manually scanned 30 million invoices. That equates to 2.5 million hours spent on this manual activity. And if you think that's an incredible fact, let's kind of take it down and let's just look at a typical PayScan client, right? So for our typical clients, they're processing around 35,000 invoices annually. So this activity for a typical client is equal to 2,900 hours, or the effort of one full-time employee. So with outsourcing this manual task, that one full-time employee can focus on higher value activities like managing the vendor relationship and also managing contract pricing. So in addition to challenges seen for invoice processing, procurement, and vendor management, there's also challenges experienced in operations. So our clients often struggle with closing the disconnect between what is happening at the communities and decisions that are being made more centrally. So the visibility into budgets and, as I mentioned before, visibility into cash flow are often lacking, and access to centralized information can create inconsistent policies between communities. So implementing the right P2P platform can dramatically increase access to the information and improve decision-making across your organization. So Carmen, we previously discussed, the control and compliance you've acquired through the use of Yardi's Procure to Pay, but I know that we discussed earlier there's been other benefits. So as you've introduced your users into, PayScan, into Procure to Pay, simply to review and, approve or reject your invoices, what other benefits, do those users experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, and full service was sort of a watershed moment for us. It really opened up possibilities, like we talked about, with getting systems to talk to one another. And it really helped us with our intercompany tracking, turning that in from the hardest thing that we were doing every month and every year to the things basically an afterthought. It also opened the floodgates to do our bank reconciliations in Yardi, track our fixed assets in Yardi, all sorts of other really cool benefits. One of the other things that hadn't really anticipated, maybe thought maybe we'd get some additional insight into, is invoice processing times. And so we had a real challenge with sort of our decentralized invoice processing, where, depending on the quality of that particular office manager, you might get a stack of 50 invoices stuck in a drawer somewhere for 45 days, and then we wouldn't know until somebody called us and said, hey, we need to get those paid. And so that was sort of a normal course for us. And so we spent a lot of time inefficiently chasing those things down and resolving problems instead of just spending a little bit of time up front and fixing it and doing it right the first time. And so for us, what that looks like is we have a report that we run out of Yardi. We look at it every month. It tells us what our lag times are from invoice date to creation of the invoice record in Yardi, and then again from that point to when it actually gets approved and posted into accounts payable. And so we've got metrics set up there. I can't tell you how beneficial that has been for us. Instead of scrambling around and trying to figure out how to make emergency payments and kind of distracting the AP team and the business office team for these self-made emergencies, those things have totally sloughed off and basically vanished. And we are extremely happy about that. It's one of the reasons why we're able to be so efficient. The other benefits, like you talked about, Kim, is once you get all of these users in Yardi and you really leverage what we think that you leverage your workflows in the right way, you get a lot of participation in Yardi. And once you get a lot of participation in Yardi, all sorts of other things become possible. Meaning, like, a good example is, you know, the culinary director at each of the communities can now dig into financial analytics and poke around and say, hey, what's going on with my budget? You know, you know, and they're asking a lot better questions, and they're focused on it more, and we're all sort of talking the same language, and it's really been a huge benefit for us in that way as well.
That's great. That's great. I like that term. What was it? Self-imposed emergencies? Was that the term you used? I like that a lot. Yeah. Yeah. That is great, right? Centralized location of information. The users are there. And so now, instead of coming to you or asking someone else in management, they can actually dig into those analytics and see, you know, what's going on, you know, the orders that are coming in. And again, you know, your culinary director, as you used as the example, can see exactly, you know, the spend that he is in control of, right? And so he can access details very easily now that he's used to being a user of the Procure to Pay system. One of the things that we always recommend too, that you brought up, Carmen, is with our clients. Once we implement our clients, after they have processed for, you know, around 6 months, we always do and recommend what, or suggest highly to them to do exactly what Silverado is doing, and that's to continuously run those operational analytics, look at your processing time, see where improvements can continuously, you know, occur. You know, if there's an issue with an approval time, it can easily be addressed. Is it a tweak to the workflow, or maybe, you know, some additional training for the users needed? But all that information is there so that you can continuously improve upon your automated process, which I think is great. So thank you for that.
Kim, are these custom reports, particularly the one that looks at the time for each phase of the approval and payment process, or is that a standard report?
Yeah, see, that's a great question. It's a standard report. It's called PayScan Operational Analytics. It looks at, you know, your approval times for your invoices. It looks at your approval times for your POs, the number of times you're using certain workflows. So potentially, is there a workflow that's not needed that can be inactivated? So no one, you know, on your admin team is having to maintain that workflow. It looks at the top vendors that you're doing business with. Right? It looks also at, you know, how many invoices are manually being created, how many invoices are being approved through the mobile app, payment information, right? How many days during the month are people processing payments, and why? If it's, you know, a high number, then why? So there's a lot of great information in this, you know, standard report that we share with all of our Procure to Pay clients. And one thing that's coming, as Carmen mentioned, is we now currently, one of our new features is that you can actually put in metrics into the system. So you can say, hey, I don't want to take more than 5 days to approve my invoice. So you can enter that metric into the database, and then you can run those reports and see if you're meeting those goals or not. So, you know, it's very powerful to have all that data in one centralized location, because then you can slice and dice and interpret as needed.
Yeah, and Kim, just to add on to that, the tool that you're describing is a powerful tool. It's a good way to check the overall health of your processes and just general adoption in the company. It's important to look at it. I think what we found relatively early on as well, that was great information. Really, the information that we needed to get down to have actionable intelligence, so to speak, was another report, which I think the name of the report is escaping me, but it goes invoice by invoice. It tells you exactly the date that the invoice register record was created in Yardi. It also has the invoice date and the date that it was finally approved. So I can go after individual invoices, and I have those records, and I can create that report in seconds, and I can go out and I can go and hold people accountable and remind them of process and retrain them, and really it's been a useful tool for us. But that was not a custom report, And the name is escaping
Right.
me. I'll make sure that I get that over to Steve. But yeah.
Thank you for that reminder, Carmen. I believe you're referring to the workflow analytics, and you're absolutely correct. That is another standard out-of-the-box report that's been created, so our clients can see exactly what's going on with that invoice approval time and that process. Yeah, great. All right, so moving right along. So talking about, efficiencies that Silverado has seen, and it's been great, Carmen, to hear the benefits that you've seen by implementing Yardy's Procure to Pay system. But with your permission, I wanted to look at just a couple pieces of data so that, we can share with this group, how you really have benefited. So I, with your permission, looked at, the amount of times that you were needing to correct your payables and also make check corrections. And what I saw is, really impressive. So the Silverado team is reversing payables only 0.56% of the time. And this is data from the last 12 months of, your team processing. The industry average is 1.8%, so you're well below that. The other piece of data that, I thought we should share regarding errors and corrections is that in addition to correcting payables, your team has only had to void checks 0.43% of the time. And again, the industry standard or the industry average is 2.1%, which, kudos to you and your team. I think, that you're really doing a wonderful job. And, imagine the time that your team has saved simply because corrections are not needed, right?
Yeah, Kim, this is an important slide to kind of talk about the tertiary benefits of those payable reversed and check voided metrics. Payables reversed in particular. I think for us, what that means is that our reviewers are doing their job, and through PayScan, and if you've got the right levels, whatever's wrong with that payable will be caught up the chain. So something that we struggled with before, because our before PayScan, as our workflows weren't as robust as they should or could have been. So what that means is, for every payable that you reverse, you might have one or two more that slip through the cracks. That maybe the payable is okay, but maybe the coding is screwed up. And so for us, that was a big time suck for us at month end. We spent a lot of time just putting invoices back into the right place. And so we all know if you code it right the first time, you don't have to do all this rework. One, you don't have to go and play the needle in the haystack game and try to find the miscoded invoice. You get it coded right the first time. You also don't have to bother with getting it into the right bucket and all of the rigmarole that goes around with that. And you can really start realizing some of the benefits of PayScan that maybe don't have that much to do with payables. So.
Right. Agreed. And there's some other functionality that, as you know, Carmen, is built into PayScan and Procure to Pay. That's not just the invoice workflow routing, but we can also set up vendor defaults. We can actually display custom error messages. So, it helps drive and simplify that data entry, and hopefully then it reduces those corrections, which in Silverado's case, we can see that it really has. So thank you for that. So there's some other ways to increase efficiencies as well, other than what we've talked about so far. So another way that you can streamline your AP process is to provide your team with a mobile application so they can review and approve invoices or even create an invoice on the go. Also, leverage electronic payments. So just like outsourcing your invoice creation for vendors or through EDI or through outsourcing to our full service team, you can reduce the amount of time your team is spending on printing checks and stuffing envelopes by using Yardy's bill pay functionality. So here's a quote from another senior living client, Cascadia. And by using Yardy's bill pay functionality to automate the creation of the payments, one of their team members actually got back 6 working days which now that team member can use for higher value activities, which is just great. So I guess for me to summarize about all the things that we've talked about today, really our goal at Yardi is to help you dramatically reduce friction across all elements of your AP and procure to pay life cycle. So we want to improve vendor management by providing an online vendor facing portal where they have visibility into their day-to-day business with you. We also want to provide a way to automate the creation of those invoices using this portal from those vendors. We want to simplify purchasing while providing that control and insight into your procurement process and spend. And for invoice processing, we want to provide an easy way to review and approve an invoice while also reducing the time spent on these reviews by automating online workflows and providing mobile access. And lastly, we want our organization to stop spending time, of course, as I mentioned before, spending time printing checks and stuffing envelopes. So especially, this is especially important today because no one wants to travel into the office simply to print out checks. So Carmen, thanks again for your time today. And thanks to Steve, and thanks for everyone that's joined today. I know for Silverado, this savings in time and effort allows your team to focus on what's really important to you, and that's improving the quality of life for those people in your communities. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of closing thoughts, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that the Yardi app, the PayScan app, allows you to approve invoices, review them, double check coding, do the same with purchase orders, et cetera, et cetera. And we've had a pretty high adoption rate on that. I think we're running upwards of 80 or 90% of our invoices are approved on that app.
Right.
It sounds like a small thing, but it's a really, really important thing. So we've got administrators and culinary directors, and we've got the CFO, and they're all busy running around doing their day job. And for us, that's changing people's lives and making their lives, improving their quality of life, and that's an important thing for us. And that's really the main focus for us. We've got a mandate here from those above us to make ourselves scalable and make ourselves efficient, that we can focus on what we do good and what we're providing out for the community. And so PayScan is an important piece of that. If you do it right, nobody asks once or twice about PayScan or what the problem is. They focus on doing their job, and we see as changing lives. So we're really excited about the benefits that we're getting there, and allow us to continue our mission and even be better at it. So thank you.
And thanks, Carmen. Thanks for allowing Yardi to be a partner with you and to just simply being a small part of your goal of improving people's lives. So thank you very much.
So I've got a couple of questions and last thoughts. Carmen, when you made the decision to fix your accounts payable, how long did it take you to get it right-sized?
That's an interesting question because we knew pretty early on that I wanted it was going to be a watershed thing for us, and I wanted it to, once we implemented it, I wanted it to be able to work seamlessly with all these other things that I knew I wanted to do. And so we really took our time. The biggest thing for us, the biggest hurdle for us because of our complex org structure and legal structure was getting the intercompanies set up right, the automated intercompany transactions. And so we really took our time to make sure that was pristine. So we didn't have any surprises when we went live. But I think from start to finish, the technical side of it, maybe 3 or 4 months, something like that. I think the bigger piece of it was socializing this big change in the company and saying, hey, and making sure that everybody was on board and they were understanding the benefits of it, or at least trusted that there were going to be tertiary benefits. And so that took maybe 8 or 9 months. And that was the bigger sale. And once you get your foot in the door, then you can really kind of execute and that speed to implement wasn't too terrible for us.
So I've got one more question, then I'll come to the one in chat. So I'm assuming that for your executive directors, when you pull that accounting function out of the property level and into the corporate office, that was sort of that it created mixed reactions for the executive directors. Did they welcome that? Did they feel like they were losing control? Can you just sort of talk about that emotional part of that process?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question, and that for us was by far the biggest hurdle. Is just getting people used to that change. And I think for a lot of our, we call them administrators. Some of you guys might call them executive directors, but for those folks, that business office manager was their right-hand person for a lot of things, and they were doing a lot of things. So the transition was interesting, to say the least. What we did a couple of things. We tried to staff that centralized business office with experienced business office managers in the field to sort of credentialize ourselves with them. And then the other thing that we did really was try to solve for that problem that our administrators had, that they thought that they were losing, was they needed a right-hand person. And so we really built out and developed their executive assistant position and staff that more appropriately so that they could help out with things that maybe the business office manager was helping out with that might not have been related to, you know, payroll or the accounting function or HR, et cetera, just being there to help the administrator. And so that was the thing that got us over the hump. And then just time, reacclimating. And when we made the transition, we had lots of business process changes. You can imagine if you've got 50 business managers, you've got 50 different ways of doing stuff. And so you've got to take the best parts and pieces of all of those and make that sort of amalgamation of what we think was the right answer. And so, you know, negotiating that minefield. And, you know, we're a little over a year out from that, and it's been really fruitful for us. So things like DSO, we've been able to reduce DSO by literally half. We've reduced invoice processing times by 2/3. We're getting those self-made emergencies, and it's really been pretty beneficial for us.
So, so one thing I have to say is I love this term, self-made emergencies. You're probably going to see that show up in an article someplace at Senior Living Foresight in the next few weeks or months. So what a great term of art. Another question that came up is, what's a reasonable amount of time to set up a vendor with electronic payments? I don't know whether Carmen or Kim best answer that. So
yeah, yeah, maybe I'll transition that.
Yeah. So a reasonable amount of time. So one of the things that, you know, our online vendor portal, Vendor Cafe, can actually facilitate is, you know, along with, you know, using the vendor workflows to vet out the vendor, make sure that the contracts are valid, is there's also functionality where you can actually request electronic banking information from your vendors. They get a notification, they log into Vendor Cafe, they upload their banking information. There's, you know, some validation that occurs, but there's also control. So you can request that information, they can submit their banking information. Your team would then review that information and choose to approve or reject it. And only when it's approved will that banking information then be written to that vendor record and the default payment method flip to, you know, ACH or EFT. So for me, you know, it can take as little as, you know, an afternoon or less. You know, if you ask that vendor for the information and they provide it, then you can start processing that day.
great. I think that is the one other thing I would say is I'm actually a Yardi vendor, and I will tell you that I get paid very, you know, I'm going to tell you, I know we use you pay us electronically, and I don't even remember setting it up. I know we did, which means it was that easy, and it works great for us.
Right.
I mean, personal testimonial from the vendor side. Carmen, Kim,
Wonderful.
thank you very much for all of this. For those of you who are in the audience, thank you for watching. This was great information. I learned a ton. Again, we will make available to you the recording, and we will make available to you a PDF of the slide deck, and that will be out to you in the next day or two. Any last questions? Any last comments, either Kim or Carmen?
Just thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Oh, I was just saying goodbye and thanking everybody.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.